We are discussing chapter number 2, which is the nationalist movement in Indo-China. What we have seen is that there was an idea of the French colonial people to teach the under-civilized Vietnamese. So we saw that there was resistance in school, how the students and the teacher, they resisted. The teachers and students, because the curriculum was made by the French, they did not follow them blindly. If there is some opposition, you can say, then they just keep silence. And when the Vietnamese teachers are increased in the lower classes, they changed, they modified the text, because they know, they understood what is written in the textbook. So they modified it very quietly, and then they taught this to the Vietnamese students. And they also criticized what is stated in the books. For Vietnamese, the content was not up to the mark, means not in the Vietnamese favor but in French favor. So in 1926 there was a major protest in the Saigon native girls' school. What happened was, see, there was a girl who was sitting in the front bench. So the teacher came and asked this Vietnamese girl to leave this space and sit in the back, because this place has to be taken by some French girl. Now this girl, she denied. She said, no, I'm not going to sit on the back bench. I will continue sitting here. So what happened? She was expelled. The principal expelled this Vietnamese girl. And then these students, the other fellow students, they got angry. And then we got angry, they protested. And there were spread of open protest, because now the supporting students, you can say, who were protesting for this girl, they were also expelled. So this lead a further chain reaction for the others to follow to protest. And when this situation was seen by the principal and the colonial people that it is going out of the hand, so they were forced to take this girl back who was being expelled. But the principal, he was very harsh. He took the student back, with Vietnamese girl back, but he said, I will crush all Vietnamese under my feet, right? So there are certain words also he said that just shows his anger towards the Vietnamese. Then there were other things also happening. The students fought against the colonial government's effort to prevent these Vietnamese students to qualify for white-collar job. And there was a patriotic feeling, there was a conviction, and that is their duty of the educated to fight for the benefit of society. And there was a conflict, that is because the French saw that these elite will be passed, or they will take the place of the colons and ours. But the students in 1920s, they were forming various political parties like the Party of Young Annan, and also publishing certain nationalist journals, and in journals like Annanese Student. So now these students also were the part of political and cultural battles. And this, the French sought to strengthen their rule in Vietnam through what? Control of education. So they tried to change the values, the norms, the people thinking, and also make them believe that French civilization is superior to the Vietnamese civilization. But these Vietnamese individuals, they were fearing that they are losing their territory. They are also seeing that their culture and customs are being devalued by these French people, and there is a kind of master-slave mentality which is emerging. So this battle against the French colonial education, this was the idea of the Vietnamese to go out of this colony and become independent, and we'll see how this took place. Before we go ahead, let me tell you some important dates. In 1802, Nguyen An becomes emperor, symbolizing the unification of the country under the Nguyen dynasty. In 1867, Cochin, China, that is the south, becomes the French colony. In 1887, there was a creation of Indo-China Union, which includes this Cochin China, Annan, Tonkin, all these are in Vietnam, and Cambodia, and then later Laos. In 1930, Ho Chi Minh forms the Vietnamese Communist Party. In 1945, the Viet Minh, it started a general popular insurrection. Bao Dai abdicates and Ho Chi Minh declares independence in Hanoi. In 1954, the French army is defeated at Dien Bien Phu. In 1961, Kennedy decides to increase the US military to South Vietnam. 1974, Paris Peace Treaty was done. In 1975, NLF troops enter Saigon. And finally, in 1976, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam is proclaimed. So what was happening in other parts? Because the revolution in small chunks, small parts also was taking place. Hygiene, disease and everyday resistance. That is, the political battles are being fought in every sphere of everyday life. There are other institutions also which this was going on because people were expressing their anger for the colonizers. So there was a plague in the Hanoi. This is a city. So we'll take the case of health and hygiene. Now what French did, they decided to rebuild Hanoi, and they took the latest ideas of latest modern architecture and engineering skill to make this city modern. In 1903, this modern part of Hanoi, it was struck by plague, and it was bubonic plague. And there was a serious conflict, because the French wanted to control this disease and how it happened. So the French part of Hanoi, if you see this picture, this is a modern Hanoi. These are colonial buildings. This came up in the French part of Hanoi, not on the Vietnamese part. So French part was quite a well-built, beautiful and clean city, had wide avenues, and the sewer system was well laid out. But the natives, that is the Vietnamese quarter, not very modern facilities were there, and in heavy rains and floods, the waste overflow on the street. That is the problem of unhygienic environment in the native quarter of Vietnamese. So this became the cause of the plague, and plague was caused by mouses. So what happened? There were large sewer in the modern part of the city. That is the symbol of the modernity. So there were large sewer being laid here like this. Now the sewer was a great transport system for whom? For rats. Now because it was underlaid or underneath the ground, the mouses, they can easily move around all the city without any problem. And this was the problem. This caused that bubonic plague, right? And these mouses would come out to the French homes also through the pipes. So now what to do? There is only one possibility: rat hunt. Kill the rat. That is to stop the plague. So rat hunt was started in 1902 to curb the rat population, to finish them. So the French hired Vietnamese and they paid them on per basis, means on per rat basis. That is, rats, Vietnamese started catching a lot of rats. For instance, 20,000 were caught, but the mouse were not ending, the rats were not ending. And this is a kind of people learn that, okay, now we can come together and we can now bargain to the French people. The Vietnamese thought that. Now they have an idea of negotiating. So the bounty was paid how? When someone comes with the tail as the proof that, okay, I have killed a rat. But what rat catcher would do, these Vietnamese would do what? They would just clip the tail and they will release the rat. And this was done again and again, and some people even started raising the rats for the bounty, for the money. So because this was happening, French they have to scrap this bounty program. They cannot continue with this. And this bubonic plague swept through the area in 1903, and the rat menace marks the limits of French power and the contradictions that they actually came there to civilize the people, right? And the rat catchers, those Vietnamese, they also showed that they are against the French in everyday life also. Then how this religion or religious sentiments helped the anti-colonial sentiments and the nationalism? See, this the French occupied Vietnam military, because they want to militarily they want to reshape the Vietnamese social and cultural life. So what did they do? First of all, we have to understand that the Vietnam religious belief was mixture of various cultures and various you can say religious belief: Buddhism, Confucianism, and local practices. So Confucius is what? Let us understand this. He was a Chinese thinker. He developed a philosophical system based on good conduct, practical wisdom, and proper social relationship. And people were taught under Confucius thoughts that they have to respect their parents and submit to elders. They were also told that the relationship between the ruler and the people is just like the children and the parents. This was Confucius thoughts, or Confucianism, like this, Confucianism. So this is the mixture of religious belief of Vietnamese, Buddhism, Confucius, and local practices. Now, Christianity, because the French were there and French missionaries, they tried to introduce the Christianity, but the Vietnamese, they don't want that. Because they thought that French thought that Vietnamese says that there is a supernatural power or something like that. So they just want to change that. And from the 18th century, many religious movements were hostile, or they were against the Western presence. So first movement, that is the religious movement against the French control and what Christianity they were spreading, was the first one, Scholars' Revolt in 1868. This is important. This is the first of its kind. So you can see this picture, the execution of Father Bory. He was a Catholic missionary. So first revolt was this, Scholars' Revolt. And this also spread the anger, you can say. Because who led this revolt? It was led by the officials at the imperial court. That is, those who are ruling, those officials in that ruler part. I'm not saying French, the other Vietnamese ruler, you can say. Those officials were in this revolt, so Scholar Revolt. And they led a general uprising in Guan and Ha Tien. Now these two places are very important. In these provinces, over 1,000 Catholics were killed, and But Catholic missionaries, they were very active. By the middle of the 18th century and by the early 17th century, they have converted around 3,300,000 people to Christianity. So this again was you can say impotence for the uprising of patriots to stop this. And now the elites in the Vietnam, they were educated in Chinese, and again China thought that is Confucianism. So Confucius and Chinese, these are the two thought. But the religious belief among these peasants was shaped by different syncretic tradition. That is, you can understand by combining the Buddhism and the local tradition belief and religious belief, right? So these were there were certain movements which took place, but French, they stopped it. There was one more movement. First was that revolt I told you. The second was the Hoa Hao. This started in 1939, and this gained a lot of you can say attention and popularity in the fertile Mekong River Delta area, and it drew a religious idea which is popular in the anti-French uprising of the 19th century. And who was the founder of this Hoa Hao movement? He was called as Hyun Fu So. Now, he used to perform miracles, help the poor, and he criticized the expenditure, useless expenditure. He also opposed the sale of child brides, gambling, and he was opposing the alcohol and opium. Now, French did all the thing to suppress the movement which is inspired by Hyun Fu So. They declared him mad and called him Mad Bones and sent him to mental asylum. But the doctor who came to him, he became his follower. And finally, in 1941, it was being declared that this guy Fu So is not insane, he is sane. And he was expelled to Laos. And the followers, most of them, were sent to the concentration camps. So these movements which take place, they have very different or contradictory relationship with the nationalism which was mainstream. And they cannot discipline these groups, they cannot support the mainstream people, cannot support the ritual and practices. But still, all these movements, two movements we saw, first was the revolt and second was by Hyun Fu So, this added up to the sentiments of anti-imperialist among the people. Then was the vision of modernization. So everyone tried to resist the French colonialism, but there were certain questions that what is this modernism and who should we call nationalists? What is the modernism? That means we just leave all the ideas and social practices that we were doing, or we just understand or consider the West as they are developed and civilized and we just copy the West. So all these questions were in the minds. So different answers were there for these questions. Some intellectuals, they thought that the Vietnamese tradition, these traditions need to be overhauled or strengthened if they want to stop or resist the domination of the West. But others thought that Vietnam has to learn from this West. Means they must oppose the foreign domination, but they must learn from this West also, that is the European countries. So this debate went on. So in late 19th century, this was the domination, French domination was resisted mostly by the Confucian scholar activist, who saw, because they saw that their world is crumbling because of the French domination. There was a person, Fan Boi Chao. He was educated in Confucian tradition. he was one kind of nationalist, and he was the major figure in anti-colonial resistance from the time he formed a society, revolutionary society, and in Vietnamese it is called as Dai Tan Hoi in 1903, and the head was Prince Quang Diaz. So this guy, Phan Boi Chau, he met the Chinese reformer Liang Qichao in Yokohama, and this Phan's book, The History of the Loss of Vietnam, it has strong influence and advice from this Chinese reformer Liang Qichao, and this was the bestseller. Even plays were made on this, and this because it was a kind of connection between the China and Vietnam. There was a ties between them, and the elites, of course, Vietnamese and Chinese, they shared culture. So it is this double loss that Phan laments. That is a lament that was typical of reformers from within the traditional elite, that we are losing the ties, sovereignty also, and the ties of the culture with the Chinese. Now there was other nationalist also, which was called as Phan Boi Chau, means he differed with Phan Boi Chau, and the person is called as Phan Chu Trinh. Means there were two nationalists which are remarkable. One was Phan Chui Bao, we just learned about him, and the other was Phan Chu Trinh. So the difference between these two thoughts are being asked normally, so you should understand this. Now, he was very hostile. He doesn't want any monarchy, and he also opposed that idea that we should use the court or the monarchy for resisting the French. What his idea was, he wanted a democratic republic. So a republic is a form of government based on popular consent and popular representation. It is based on the power of the people as opposed to the monarchy. So he is quite influenced by the West democratic ideals, and he doesn't want actually to just reject the Western civilization. He was in favor of Western civilization. He demanded that the French should do something for the country. That is, the French should set up some legal and educational institution also. They must do something to develop the agriculture and industries. This is what Phan Chu Trinh has thoughts. And then other way of becoming modern, we will take the examples of Japan and China. As we said that the early Vietnamese, they have very close ties and relationship with Japan and China. So the Japan and China, they both are providing a model. And the refugees of Vietnam people, Vietnamese, they just go to, if they want to escape from French police, there was a great location of you can say they can go. That is, there was kind of Asian network being built so that they can just run to Japan and China. So in first decade of this 20th century, a Go East movement, it became popular. And some 300 Vietnamese students, they in 1907, 1908, they went to Japan for modern education. But the primary idea was, the objective was, they wanted to drive out French or overthrow them from the country. They wanted to overthrow also the puppet emperor, and they wanted to bring back the Nguyen dynasty. And who deposed this Nguyen dynasty? The French. So these nationalists looked for foreign helps and arms, and they were happy. They were happy. That is, they appealed to the Japanese also, because they thought the Japanese are Asians too. So Japanese are way ahead. They have already modernized themselves, and they were successful to colonize, means to resist the colonies if anyone comes there to make them as a colony. So they resisted very successfully, and also they had a victory over Russia in 1907, and that shows that their might as a military power. So Vietnamese students, they established a branch of Restoration Society in Tokyo, But after 1908, Japanese ministry, it just stopped them. And many, including this Fan Boichao, they were just deported from Japan and sent. They have to seek exile in where? China and Thailand. So if you see this picture, this is the cartoon of Vietnamese nationalists. They are chasing these imperialists. So development in China, this also inspired Vietnamese nationalists. We just saw that what happened in Japan. These events influenced the Vietnamese. But what happened in China also influenced them, because in 1911 there was a long monarchy in China, and Sun Yat-sen, under his leadership, it was being overthrown. That is, monarchy was overthrown and republic was set up. So now, inspired by these events, Vietnamese students, they organized the Association for the Restoration of Vietnam. They call it as Vietnam Quan Phuc Hoi. Right? So this is how they made proper you can say associations. The idea is not just to have a constitutional monarchy, but now the idea of Vietnamese and Vietnamese students and the upcoming generation was to have a democratic republic. Right? So how this came, how this anti-imperialist movement took place, we'll talk about that. So this is all for today, and we'll be taking a few more parts. Till then, thank you so much. Take care of yourself.